I explained that Canada, of course, paid for the construction of the bridge, over $4 billion, that the ownership is shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada.
Canada-U.S. dispute of a bridge connecting Windsor and Detroit comes at a moment of wider uncertainty. Really, it's just a dispute from the president, not the whole United States. From reports about the future of CUSMA to Team Canada beginning a trade mission in Mexico today, what does all of it signal about Canada-U.S. trade relations? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Charelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times in Ottawa. Robert Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. And Jason Markusoff is a producer and writer for CBC News. He's in Calgary. Nice to see everyone this morning. Rob, I'm going to start with you. Unusual, I think, for the Prime Minister to say, hey, I called the President this morning and I straightened things out with him because we actually paid for this bridge and it's going to go ahead. What did you make of sort of the way the Prime Minister tackled this, given these threats from the President?
It was almost, Rosie, as if the Prime Minister was patiently explaining something to an erratic elderly relative who was perhaps vexed about something he didn't quite understand, and trying to talk him off of a ledge, so to speak. And I thought that was the tone from on both sides of the border. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, said as much. The Prime Minister here, Premier Doug Ford, you had a clip earlier of. It was always about, just a reminder, Mr. President, this bridge, which, by the way, the first American money that flowed for this bridge was by President Trump in 2017, $15 million for part of the infrastructure on the American side. So even his own rationale for this crazy tweet where he was complaining about that it was Canadian territory on both, or Canadians had paid for both sides of the bridge, and the Canadians controlled this and the Canadians controlled that. That was all wrong. We have an op-ed in our paper today from Governor Rick Snyder, the former Republican governor of Michigan, and he also debunked what Mr. Trump was saying. And it was an erratic late night tweet from Trump, and I'm glad that everyone sort of turns the temperature down in this country when something like this happens, rather than pouring gasoline on the fire. And I mean, the bridge will open. It's named the Gordie Howe Bridge after the great Detroit Red Wings star who was born in Saskatchewan. So it is a Canadian-built, Canadian-financed piece of infrastructure, but it is going to be shared with the state of Michigan.
Yeah, and we did find out as well that the owner of the Ambassador Bridge lobbied the president before tweeting this or making these comments on Truth Social. So, Charelle, he was obviously affected by whatever this gentleman had to say to him. I don't know. What do you make of this particular? I guess it's a personal irritant for the president because it's not something, as Rob says, that anyone else is complaining about.
Right, and it kind of follows the pattern that we do typically see with this president of kind of whoever was in his ear last is the one who has the most impact on what the president does next. And as president has shown, you hear about the lobbying from the owner of the Ambassador Bridge, and you go, okay, well that's those dominoes start falling into place. Those things start making sense. So I did find it very interesting that but you're also starting to see, I think, you saw it with the bridge and you're seeing it with some other things, that sense of pushback, not only from the Canadian side, of which there is always that pushback, but also from the American side. And that's becoming a little bit more vocal, a little bit more clear, they're dancing around it less and just trying to be like, hey, actually, you know what? This isn't right and this is wrong. And we're going to stand up for, the facts in this situation. You also saw it with the, handful of Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives who voted with the Democrats on trying to get rid of the tariffs on Canada. So there's these little things that I think as time is passing, people are realizing, okay, this guy's serious. We have to deal with this for another 3 years, and we can't keep going along like this. So now is the time to incrementally, at least, start speaking up and making actions symbolic, as they may be, to actually try to put some sort of stop to the president just kind of steamrolling over everybody.
Right, and it comes also amidst this week. There were again reports that the president has asked for a plan to just leave CUSMA altogether. And so, Jason, I mean, that's what all of this sort of feeds into, you know, whether you react or respond to everything the president says and does, whether it's real or not, it does lead us closer and closer to what's going to happen with this trade deal, which I think is more serious and more consequential for Canada than all these other things. So how do you see those things playing out now?
It appears that this bridge tweet, truth show, social, whatever you call it, it seems like a watershed moment. Like this is the one where nobody on the Canada side reacted with panic or nervousness, really, unless I missed some of them. You know, oftentimes you'll see one of the many threats, be they materialized or unmaterialized, by President Trump, that you'll have certain people, often in the business community, some of the business chief business lobbyists saying we really need to respond to this. This is quite nerve-wracking. Maybe some of the Western premiers who aren't as affected by trade will say need to treat seriously his things. Nobody seemed to treat this seriously. Everybody seemed to, of course, what would they have done? His demand was for maybe half of the asset of the bridge to be American. Well, okay, that's already the deal struck by the Republican governor that Rob mentioned earlier, Rick Snyder, back more than a decade ago. You know, people are, this was like number 37 occasion that Trump has talked about walking away from CUSMA. It's the classic art of the deal thing that he's doing. People are getting used to it, and I think that people are really like operationalizing the stuff that Carney has said about there's a rupture. We don't have to treat this. We can't treat this the way it normally is. We have to do things differently, and it's also facing this reality that's slapping Donald Trump and the Republicans in the face, that Americans want freer trade. They want. They are unhappy with how tariffs are affecting prices and inflation and the economy. There are even reports this week that Trump is reconsidering some of the steel and aluminum tariffs because it's affecting his economy. So this is all just landing in a very different environment than it might have last year.
Yeah, the White House denied those reports, but yes, they were out there. So who knows whether it was a trial balloon or what was going on. But Rob, do you agree with Jason that things are getting harder for the president, and in part because people sort of know how to respond and react to him now?
Yeah, I do, Rosie, and as Charelle was mentioning, that vote in Congress that Trump lost, the 6 Republicans voted with the Democrats to say that about tariffs on Canada shouldn't be permitted. We're going to have a Supreme Court ruling on the legality of Mr. Trump's tariffs. I also think that we should take heed of something the commentator David Frum has been saying for some time now, and it's Trump is getting weaker, not stronger. So the longer we wait to renegotiate CUSMA or whatever the future trade agreement on this continent looks like or is called, the weaker Mr. Trump is. The midterm elections will not be kind to his party, according to public opinion polls. Right now, he has a 36% approval rating in the United States. Prices are going up. Jobs are being lost. And I think at a certain point, more and more Republicans will turn on him as their own political survival becomes problematic. And I mean, Rosie, you know this. You've covered politics a long time, as I have. When people's own seats and own political futures are at stake, they find a way of surviving on their own. It becomes every person for themselves, and I think that's what we're going to see in the months ahead, because Trump's polling is not going to go up, and there's no indication why it would go up. He's in trouble politically. 30
seconds to you, Charelle.
I would just say I wouldn't completely write it off, given that their system is the U.S. system so different than ours, and Trump can, whether or not he has, the houses of Congress, and he can still do a lot of damage with his own executive orders. And feeling isolated and pushed out and attacked, that could lead to a whole different situation than we're in right now. But that's not to say everybody should be scared. But I do believe that there is still plenty of things that Canada can and should be doing to try to mitigate some of those potential issues as they come down the line.
I, the leader of the opposition, the leader of all the federal parties, wanted you to hear, not from Ottawa, not through a screen, but standing here together.
Today, there are no conservatives. There are no Liberals, New Democrats, Greens, or Bloc Québécois. We are all, as we were in that plane together, mothers and fathers.
As we've been mentioning, all federal party leaders were in Tumbler Ridge for the vigil. They traveled together in the Prime Minister's plane, putting politics aside. How important was this show of unity, and what does it signal about Canadian politics? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Charelle Evelyn, managing editor of the Hill Times. Robert Benzie, Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star, and Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC News in Calgary. Good to see you all again. I mean, in these moments, and this is the reason I want to talk about it, leaders and politicians do have an important role to play. And I guess my question is whether they managed to sort of meet the moment, and what you thought the past few days says about Canadian politicians or Canadian politics. Jason, I'll start with you on that.
I mean, I almost, in trying to understand that I think about the opposite, like what would happen if somebody didn't meet the moment, if somebody, if somebody acted in a partisan way, if they looked right to the solutions, demanding answers in this moment when people are grieving. I mean, so much of politics is meeting people where they are, and where they are certainly in Tumbler Ridge and in much of the rest of the country is shock at what has happened, to have to grieve so many 11, 12, 13-year-olds. And as the politicians themselves said, I think it's probably their parents, when there was that one picture of Polyev and Mary Simon and Carney together, and Carney has this giant frown, and doesn't that speak for how so many of us respond to it? So I think about the opposite of this. I think if somebody was to be partisan, if somebody was to refuse to take a plane ride with the Prime Minister, how so many Canadians might conclude that person is unsuited to the job of leading a country when it's feeling this way at this point.
And Rob, from your perspective, why is it important for political leaders to step up in a moment like this? What are they sort of providing the country and people in the area when they do that?
Well, you know what, Rosie? They're providing leadership, and I thought they all stepped up and did just that. And setting aside those partisan differences, as Jason said, these are very powerful images when you have the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition holding hands at a vigil. It's something that all of us as parents are heartbroken about what happened. And I was in grad school in Montreal in 1989 when the Montreal massacre happened. And I remember at the time it was said, it's hard to draw rational lessons from irrational acts. And that was an irrational act, 14 women, engineering students murdered. And this is another irrational act that's happened. These children, innocent lives ended. And that's not normal in Canada. I'm really glad it's not normal. And if we ever normalize violence like that, we become desensitized to it. And I don't think Canadians are desensitized to it. And I think our leaders did a great job at a terrible time for our country.
Yeah, and even just the holding hand during prayer was, kind of such a powerful image. I agree with you, Rob. But also even the words used, Charelle, Mr. Polyev sort of praising the Prime Minister's grace in that moment, and the grace that he showed by making sure everybody was able to go there and be with the people.
Yeah, actually, I looked back at the Prime Minister's prepared marks, which we get, and kind of compared them a little bit to what he said. And I did find a few instances of where it had been written for him to say "I," and he had changed it to "we." So I think that was fairly instructive. And you had, like as you just said, Pierre Polyev, he was repeatedly referencing the Prime Minister and his previous words and actions, and just kind of creating that image, that feeling that we are all in this together, and this is not a time for us to be pointing fingers, but literally joining hands. So I did think that was really something which you don't often see, because I'll be one of the first to kind of point the finger and say that these people who put themselves out for these jobs as leaders of political parties, as politicians, as all elected representatives, they are supposed to be leaders in their communities. And a lot of the time what we've seen is people kind of getting down to the muck and setting the tone, which has over the last few years been not that collegial, I would go as far to say.
Yeah.
So to see it now is in this, in this time, it's an extreme event, and it's unfortunate that it takes such an extreme and devastating event, tragedy for this to take place. But the fact that they are actually able to put that aside, come together, I do think is a moment, and hopefully, I'm not super hopeful, but hopefully some of that will carry over as they look back and say, you know what, some of these things aren't life and death. We've seen what life and death is, and it's possible for us to do a little better.
Well, I do think that, even the plane ride there, I don't know what the conversations were on board, but I do think just the time spent with one another could sort of shape how these leaders respect one another. So I wonder whether, we'll go back to, all sorts of partisan jabs, but I wonder whether it just sort of changes the undercurrent of what is there and whether that will be helpful. Obviously, the conversation will turn to some of the questions I asked the minister, and there aren't answers to those questions. But that will be important too, Rob, right? Like trying to get clarity around the guns, mental health, all the issues that factored into what we saw unfold.
Yeah, I mean, there are questions that Canadians have, and I thought you did a very good job, Rosie, putting those questions to the minister, and he was deflecting some of them, understandably, I suppose, on one level, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to see those answers. And I think Pierre Poilievre articulated it well last week when he said, look, there will be a time where we can talk about but this is not that time. This time now is for mourning and remembering those children and the teacher and the mother. And I think that's appropriate. This is a heartbreaking time for our country, but once the mourning kind of dissipates somewhat, we are going to have to look at what we can take from this in terms of policy changes that need to be made. Did the red flag law do its job? I'm not sure that it did.
Yeah, and also, as I talked to Bob Zimmer there, Jason, sometimes access to mental health in rural parts of the country is not the same, or it's not adequate.
Yeah, and there are some serious questions. There are many serious questions. I'm grateful that you put the questions to Minister Namasangre, even if he couldn't answer them or wouldn't answer them at this point. I can understand the sensitivity around it, but also the fact that that the RCMP are going through their motions, and with this investigation, apparently just removing the tape from the school, as your correspondent reported earlier. So there will come a time for answers, and there will probably be some sharp divisions and disagreements with different parties and policies over this, as there should. I mean, this was a serious issue, and this, there seems like there could have been ways to prevent it, but we'll keep asking those questions, but I don't know if those answers will come anytime soon. I mean, right now, in terms of mourning, I mean, we're sad, but we're still to have some funerals of children who are far too young to have funerals as well.
Listen, appreciate that conversation. Not an easy one, but appreciate you all weighing in. Charelle Evelyn, Robert Benzie, Jason Markusoff. Have a good Sunday. Thanks.